So let's now analyze and improve the visual hierarchy in our small design project by using Whitespace and also some other techniques that we just learned about. Now this is actually just a very small project, and therefore we're not going to be able to do all of the things that we just learned over the last two lectures, but we can still analyze our visual hierarchy here a little bit, and then, as I mentioned, also try to improve it. So right now, there's already, of course, some hierarchy going on. For example, if you take a look here at this component, so this header here, immediately our attention goes here to this big and bright image, and then probably here to this big heading, and then here to this button, which has this nice background color, which really makes this button here stand out and draws a lot of attention. So a lot of the work on visual hierarchy has already been done actually before, simply by applying many of the other rules. And if we move down here, it's the same. So for example here in this component here, we already made this entire component here stand out a lot by adding this background color. So by having this color, it adds a nice contrast here to the rest of the elements, so these two surrounding sections, and so that draws a lot of attention once again to this more important section here. So again, without even knowing it, we actually already worked a lot on visual hierarchy here. However, there is still a lot to do here, and mostly in the form of whitespace. So the rules that we learned about whitespace 2 lectures ago are in many situations here not really applied yet. For example, between the sections, there is not a lot of whitespace at all. So we have here this heading for this section down here, but the distance between this heading and the content of the section and the previous section, which ends here, is kind of the same. So the distance between this one here and this one is kind of the same. And so this is quite ambiguous spacing. So we don't really know where this heading here belongs to. And the same here, right? This kind of hangs in the middle of these two pieces of content. And so that's not good at all. And so remember that one of the very easy guidelines in whitespace is that we should add a lot or even a ton of whitespace between sections. All right, so let's go here to our CSS. And so somewhere here we already have some rules about this whitespace. And so that's right here. So after the header and after the section, there is a margin bottom of 48. So let's check that out here quickly, just so we all know what we're talking about. So we have a header, right? So there's some space there. And then we have the section. And so all of these then have different spacing to the bottom. All right. But now let's actually dramatically increase this. And so, just as we also learned in a lecture about whitespace, it is a good idea to use a fixed system so that we don't have to constantly choose like random spacing values, right? So we have 48 pixels right now. So all of this here is the spacing system that I mentioned before. And so let's increase that to 80 or even 96. So I'm going to experiment with those two. So let's say 80 first. Now I need to manually reload this time. And yeah, that looks better already. So here it's really visible that there now is a lot more space here. And now this heading really belongs more to this section. But I think we can actually push it even further to 96 pixels. And this is even better like this. So also there's now a nice space between this section and the footer, and here as well, and here. So that looks definitely a lot better. However, if we now scroll up, then there's a lot of space here below this image, but not here on top of the image. So we should actually add some space here as well. So basically at the top of this header. So let's see where that is. Right here. So there's a margin top of 48. And let's put that to the next value, which was, I think, 64. So 64 or maybe 80. And yeah, 64. So that looks better. Let's try 80, but I think it will be too much. Yeah. So it looks okay like this because our page is actually quite tall, but usually the browser would be a little bit smaller probably. And then this would look maybe not so nice because it wouldn't be vertically centered. So let's put it back to 64, and I think that looks okay. So that is space between sections, which remember, that's where we want to add a ton of white space. And so now let's take a look at white space between different elements. So here we already also have some white space to establish some hierarchy, because this button here kind of belongs to this block of text, I would say. And so therefore the space here is less than here. However, I think we could add some more space here below this heading to make it stand out even more. So basically, if there's more white space around it, then it will stand out more from the rest of the content. So that's 24 right now, and the next one would be 32. So that's probably good. And again, of course, when you code on your own, you'll have the system maybe somewhere else on your screen, and then you don't have to scroll up and down to see these values all the time. So that's even better now. And so let's move on to the next section. And here again, we have some ambiguous spacing. So the space between the icon and the heading, or this text here, is the same as between this heading and this text. And so that doesn't make a lot of sense, because this text here, this heading, belongs more to this text than to this element. So that's the law of proximity there. Remember that? And so what I'm going to do is to add some more space here to these icons. So here it is. It is at 16 right now, and the same for the features title. And so that's why it kind of sits here in the middle. So let's push that up to the next value, which is 24, as I know by heart. And so that is actually a lot nicer simply by adding 8 pixels of space. And moving on, here we have our next section, and here we can also add some more visual hierarchy between these 3 text elements. So actually there's already some hierarchy going on, with the most important part here bigger and bolder, and then the name of these 2 ladies, Mary and Sarah, this text is already smaller than the testimonial itself, right? However, we can also try to make it a little bit darker. And remember actually that technique that I mentioned way back when we talked about colors, where we can make the color of text inside a bright colors block, like this one here, basically adapt to that background color. So what I mean is to basically give this white text here some very, very light green color. And so then the contrast between this bright green here in the background and the white will not be as big, and it will look a little bit more natural. So hopefully you still remember that trick that I mentioned before, but of course you can always go back and check that out. Now, in order to actually get that very light green color, we should go back to open colors where we got that color in the first place. So open color, I don't know if that will be enough, but it is. And anyway, if you didn't find it this way, as always, you can just go to my resources page. But anyway, let's now try out this very first here, so this TL0, which as you see here is really, really light. So the difference will be very subtle, but these small subtle effects can make all the difference if you want to create a very polished looking design. So that would be in the testimonial text, I think. Let's see. Yeah, so that's the one. So let's give it a color that we just copied. And now take a close look here at that text. And, well, it does look almost the same as before, but if you compare it with this one here, then you can notice a subtle difference. And that's going to become even more important because now we will choose another green color for this one here and a darker one. And so then that will create some contrast between these two elements and establish a nice visual hierarchy right there. So we need to select this here, testimonial author. We don't have that yet. Can actually double click here and copy that from here. And then let's get here the next color. So this one. And now let's see what happens. And yeah, so here you can actually see that this is quite green already. It's not just as white as it was before. And so this creates now, as I mentioned before, some nice contrast between this text and this one. And so the visual hierarchy is now even better established. And now finally moving on here to our card section with the best-selling chairs, there's also some stuff that we can fix here. Because once again, we have some ambiguous spacing here. So here inside these cards, we have basically three parts. We have the heading, then we have these four bullet points here. So these four pieces of information. And then down here, we have like the rest of the card, which is the price and this button. Now, right now, the space here between all of this is basically all the same. So if you take a look, then the space here between these two pieces of information and this section here in the end is exactly the same. And even here, it looks very similar. And so that doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of visual hierarchy. So we want this block, so this list here basically, to be a bit more separate from the rest of the two pieces of content. So this one and this one. And so probably we should decrease the spacing here a little bit. All right. And actually, before we do that, we should add some more padding as well, because the space here inside of this card is really quite small. So we can push it to the next level, which is 32 pixels. And so this looks a lot better with one simple change of the padding. And so now let's decrease that spacing here between these list items, as I was mentioning. So there's 24 pixels right now. So let's take that down to 16. Right? And so before they looked a little bit detached too, but now, to my eye at least, they look a little bit more related to one another. And now finally, let's also add some more space here between this list and this part down here. So let's see what we're actually looking for here. So it's the chair details and the chair price. So let's go to the chair details and change that here a lot. So here we can maybe push it even to 48 pixels. So yeah, that looks a lot better once again. But not only does it look better, but it also works better. So the design like this makes a lot more sense because the visual hierarchy is now better established. And so it's now easier for the user to figure out what they can do here in this card. Now, there's some alignment problem here that I just noticed. So this chair price here uses Flexbox, but we do not vertically align these, right? So let's quickly do that in the chair price. So that's align items, remember. Set that to center. Nice. So that's fixed now. And I think with this, we are actually done. So if we take a look at our final product, which at this point is actually finished. So we applied all the design rules to this project right now. And so I think that it is a whole lot of difference between what we had in the beginning and what we had now. And all we did was to add a couple of lines of CSS and followed a couple of design guidelines that I have been showing you throughout this section. And once more, I want to emphasize just how big of a difference all these small changes together can make. So each of these individual adjustments that we did over time here maybe might have seemed a little bit unnecessary or too much, but if we add everything together, then all these small details make all of the difference. And so we end up with a nice design that makes sense and is easy to use. So hopefully you can take that as one of the main takeaways from this section as you start creating your own designs. But anyway, this project here is now finished, but there's actually still some more things to learn in this web design section. And so let's go now to the next lecture, which is all about user experience.